Hello, and welcome to the No Bad Questions podcast, where I try to learn in a conversational manner, to break down jargon, and to present the least amount of filtering as possible on a wide array of topics. I hope that you learn something too. If you do and want to support the podcast, you probably already know all the ways that you can do so. You can like, share, subscribe, hit the notifications, but ultimately, and what I hope you choose to do, is watch to the very end. With that, we'll start today's podcast. Hello, and welcome to this episode of No Bad Questions. I am looking forward to this one today. A lot of fun topics to talk about with my guest, Dave Kushan. Dave is founder and managing partner of HealthcareIS, an industry-leading talent access firm in the healthcare technology solutions space that has helped close to 200 organizations build world-class teams. For the past 25 years, Dave has led HealthcareIS in its partnerships with providers, payers, and health tech organizations. During that time, he's focused on the development of go-to-market talent attraction strategies for both direct hire and specialty consulting projects. And at a time of unprecedented world of work transformation, Dave has used his vast experience and expertise not only to navigate today's changing workplace landscape, but also to help organizations create a future that meet its ever-evolving demands. Dave, thanks for being here with me.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure.
So I think most people know what HR is, what a recruiter is. So let me instead ask, I always like to start with, so what is X, right? But today I'm going to say, why do businesses need somebody like yourself? Why do they need contract recruiters? Is there a difference? Why do they need an organization like yours?
Absolutely. Good question. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. It's really hard to define, even just using the word recruiter. What does that mean?
Sure.
And I think that's a challenge, because that's really across the spectrum. When you mentioned contract recruiter, I think if you start there, a lot of organizations will actually hire a contract recruiter to come in-house for a period of time and help fulfill a lot of their internal needs. And in the world of recruiting, you can start at the top with an executive search firm that will focus on presidents, CEOs, C-level of organizations. At that level, you have other types of organizations in VP, directors, managers that work as well. You've got highly specialized technical positions that you might use recruiters are an outside firm for, and you might have then you get into all other areas of volume recruiting, campus on campus university recruiting. So I think first off, organizations are hiring, they need recruitment services. Many have them internal. And I think, but if you go to the outside, you're looking for someone like our firm to help you with a new initiative or a plan that you may not have had before. You may be looking to get into new markets in the sense of who you're trying to recruit, may not have a lot of knowledge in those areas, or you're looking at very specialty or senior levels where you really want complete market exposure. You're not necessarily looking to hire or limit yourself to who may be responding to an ad at a given time, or I should say that you're making sure that you've just got a bigger scope, casting a wider net, and a specialty firm that has relationships with the people you're looking to bring aboard can really expand that reach that you have.
So it's kind of perhaps force multiplier effect, if you will.
That's a good word there to use. It really depends where an organization is. It's a very, very, very complex question on the why. I think sometimes organizations think that they're going to someone from the outside to help expand the pool of people that they want to have access to, and I think sometimes it can be a little bit deeper than that. Again, I think that term recruiter in itself is extremely broad because of the many talent attraction functions that are performed. Recruiting, as we all know it, the aspect of speaking to somebody and helping introduce them to one of our clients, is a function that exists at just about any level, but many times it can go a lot deeper in terms of a bigger talent attraction strategy. Where does an organization want to be down the road? What are the skills, knowledge bases, and experiences they're going to need to bring aboard to help attract, or I should say, to help their organization go to the next level? And that really starts out just in the resource planning, and there's many ways to go about that. I don't want to talk too much here in this light, but are you bringing people in brand new that have the right core foundation that you're looking for and developing them on your own? Are you looking for mid-level folks that you're bringing aboard that can come in and do a job immediately? Right. Using one of your terms, are you looking for somebody who can be a force multiplier? I think those questions should be part of an overall strategy, and then determine when some firm from the outside could be a partner to help you with particular areas where an organization isn't satisfied with the results that they may be getting on their own.
Yeah, yeah. And so from both perspectives, meaning from both a candidate's perspective as well as a company's perspective, like any profession, there are folks in your line of work that are fantastic. I've met some of them. I've never worked with you. You and I have had several conversations, but you strike me as up there. I've met some other folks who are up there. And there are some who are not so good, right? And perhaps not so skilled or not as diligent or whatever. How does somebody, either if you're a candidate trying to work with a recruiter or placement organization, how do you discern if somebody's any good? Or if you're a company looking to hire, how do you discern if a recruiter or placement agency is any good?
That's a tough question to answer, just in the sense of I hear what you're saying quite a bit, that somebody hasn't been happy with their interaction or the experience that they've had with an outside firm, with an outside third-party recruiting firm.
Sure.
And the reason I say it's a tough question is because I think that you have to really know what you're looking for first and what your expectations are first to be able to evaluate that. And I don't think, at least from the candidate side, people have sat down and thought about that. What you're looking for and how somebody can help you. One of the challenges in this market is that recruitment firms tend to be smaller in nature. Well, first let's just say that the barrier to entry for somebody to get into recruiting isn't very difficult, and unfortunately, but I think there's a lot of firms out there that are at different levels of their life cycle, and right. So I think everything's a little bit of a byproduct of who the founder is, who the owner is, what the values are of that organization, and it goes from there. I was very fortunate when I got into the business in the mid '90s to work for somebody who'd already had 20 years of experience. But a lot of times there's new organizations that are popping up, and somebody brand new with all the fabulous intentions in the world walks in and just doesn't learn from somebody who's very strong or experienced. And then that has its own multiplier effect of not really working out. So right. I think organizations that are using outside firms really have to know what the objective is that they're looking to accomplish with whatever firm they're partnering with. And that could be part of it too. They're not really viewing them as a partner. They're looking for somebody to provide people, but not maybe investing the time in educating those firms. And part of that educational process, taking the time to educate an outside partner, really having the understanding if they grasp who that organization is and is trying to be, so that they could represent them properly, and make sure that everybody's aligned on the same page, the organization, the recruitment partner, when they go to market, and represent what that organization has to offer.
Yeah. And so let's dive into that a little bit, because one of the things you're always posting about out on social media is using data, right? Using data to judge candidates, using data to judge how big the applicant pool is from an organization's perspective. And I think the day of this recording, you posted something about that a client had said, "Hey, we want XYZ credentials," and there was only somewhere in the teens available candidates. And so talk a little bit about, do you think, well, let me rephrase it. What do you think some of the top omissions or mistakes that people are using or not using data when it comes to knowing what they want out of a candidate?
That's a little, I'm not sure what you mean by what they want out of a candidate. Elaborate on that.
Yeah. So I'll share a story from a colleague of mine years ago when Java was pretty new. He shared, like pretty new as in less than 3 years old. And he shares a story with me that he saw a job requisition that wanted 5 years of Java experience. And Java has been around for 3.
Right.
So that's part of what, particularly since your area is technical, how often do you see, or the one you posted today, again, as of this recording, that there were only like 16 people that met the combination of certs and years of experience and whatever. So what I mean is it frequent, do you feel, that organizations don't understand the labor pool that's available and perhaps how to use data to then understand market dynamics meaning the availability of talent?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. I think from that standpoint, although we're technical, a lot of what we do is not technical. I mean, there's some positions that are that are filled with black and white. You either check the box or you don't type requirements. And I think the example that I happened to post today is a great example for the point I was trying to make, but it's one where it's very clearly black and white.
Right.
This was for a senior program project management level position, and the person had it in their mind that they wanted them to be PMP certified and a certain level of Six Sigma. And so when you have something as tangible as that, it's very easy to get market data in regards to how many people might have a combination of the certifications that client was looking for in a particular geographical area. And so to that client's credit, they took the time to determine that. And that was part of our process with them. So they had an idea in mind what they were looking for. And then prior to going out and not realizing that what they're looking for may not even exist, they took the time to use research tools that are available and say, based upon what we're looking for in this geography, here's how many, commutable distances, how many, is that enough to viably find the person we're looking for? Let's expand. They did it ahead of time. They determined that we're gonna have to go a little bit regional here. Now they can plan in potentially some relocation assistance if they require them to move, or give some thought ahead of time to a hybrid scenario. And so that can all be done ahead of time. The research should be done ahead of time. So I think those are some ways that when you're trying to recruit for difficult positions, and you're trying to provide, I'm just kind of throwing something in here. Candidate experience should be something that's really important when you're trying to attract somebody to your organization. That you can do your homework, your research up front, and then have a process put in place, as opposed to running into roadblocks because you're not quite running into the people that you are ideally looking for. But with the proper research ahead of time, that could have been easily determined.
Right. Okay. And so let's flip it and let's make it some potential candidate advice, right? In episode 3, I talked advocating for yourself with Doug Laux in the CIA, and he said he felt you had to have a golden ticket to do your best work in terms of self-advocating. How can somebody, taking that same data, you're always talking data, how can a candidate use data to try to know if they're holding a golden ticket or not when it comes to negotiating, to hiring, to anything like that?
Now, fill me in for a second. What was his definition of the golden ticket?
It was just a unique skill, a unique background, something that you're bringing to the table that if you're going to go hey, I need a raise, or hey, give me a promotion or I'm quitting or whatever. When you're self-advocating, his phrase was, you need to have a golden ticket. And for him in the CIA, it was he had graduated the farm, which is their, my understanding, they're really tough, super selective, training ground to go be in the field. Obviously, not every career is going to have that, right? Not everybody's going to have gone through the farm. Not everybody's gone through Navy SEAL training, whatever. But many industries do have restrictive certifications or unique job experiences that somebody might bring to the table and be their version of that
Yep.
golden ticket. And so how can a candidate get to any of that data or understand that data to more effectively self-advocate?
Yeah, that's thanks for explaining that. That's a good question. I think the first off, the challenge is what are you really looking for and being clear on that. And so I asked you to define what the golden ticket was simply because salary compensation can be a hard one.
Right.
There's very, very, very rarely are there compensation surveys that hit the nail right on the head in terms of size of your organization, the type of specific technology your organization may use, the region you're in, doing a cost of living comparison, which can be sometimes pretty difficult as well. That can be very difficult. So I think it's important for people to understand what's important to them. I always tell folks who we work with, especially on the candidate side, that compensation, the challenge with it is it's the only common denominator. We don't know how much value, let's go pre-COVID, we don't know how much value an individual puts on reducing their commute from 45 minutes a day to 10 minutes a day. There's a value there. And so people get into comparing the salaries and that's sometimes where it can get a little murky because there's other things beyond just salary, and most of them don't have the same level of value to each person.
Right.
But I think in terms of, it's not as easy, but the data's out there. We speak to people very frequently, not necessarily about just the next job, but their career and where they want to be. And I think if you just take LinkedIn as a tool, most people's profiles are on LinkedIn. They're filled out to different levels of capacity. They're filled out differently.
Right.
But if you decided you wanted to be, in a X position 3 years from now, you could do a search on people in that position and take a look what their profile and experience looked like prior to those people getting into that position, and then determining what you might need to do so that when that time comes that you're actually applying or being interviewed for that position, your background looks very similar to those people who have stepped into that type of a role.
I love that as tactical advice. Sorry to interrupt you, but one of the ways I got into healthcare administration was I had the opportunity to talk with a leader at the local hospital, and I had that opportunity from a parental connection. One of my father was connected with that individual. But the only way that I learned at that time, what does the background of a hospital, executive have, was getting the opportunity to have coffee with that person. Today, your point you just made, I love that. You just go research, right? You don't have to have the established network and ask them to donate time, and maybe they'll give you time for a cup of coffee. Maybe they won't. Maybe you can put in the legwork and do the research for yourself to figure out the career path and background of where you aspire to be. I love that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks. I think the challenge sometimes for folks when they're doing that is not being able to identify the distinct information that makes a difference. And so what I mean by that is there's a difference between taking the next step when you're doing it within your own organization where the people are familiar with you, and getting that position you're looking for as an outsider within the organization. And so little subtleties like that, where you're starting to profile the type of background you think you may need to step into the next role, and you'll see somebody who's in that role. But if the prior position was within their own organization, where they came with the credibility so I guess let me say it differently. If they had a little bit of a lesser set of accomplishments, but they may come with the credibility of a solid performer, hard worker, although whatever the intangibles may be, that they are truly, that they learn in a reasonable capacity. They've been there for, I shouldn't say reasonable, but whenever they've been trained, they've grasped everything. The investments that have been put into them have come to fruition, which isn't always the case.
Right.
They may be able to take a little bit more of a chance, because in their mind it isn't a chance.
Right.
That person will do well at the next step. So I think just profile, that data's there, the information's there. It's like you said, you go back a number of years prior to having so much information online, and it was one phone call at a time and hoping that you had the connections. So
right.
I hope that helps.
I hope it helps listeners too. That's, if nothing else from any given podcast, I hope I give one or two nuggets, tactics, whatever you want to call them, to people to use or to think about differently. One of the things you talked about in there was how people value sort of the X factor, right? The commute. And so the commute, I think, allows us to go down the lane, the discussion pathway of remote, hybrid, on-site. It's all the rave. It's all the talk right now. And I don't want to talk about, per se, the pros and cons of remote versus on-site, right? Because there's a million people with opinions on that, and our discussion here is not going to be nuanced enough for every organization. But what I did want to talk about in this was, are there things, I think kind of to your point in there earlier, that organizations that you talk to or just that you're seeing out in the marketplace are not thinking about when it comes to on-site, hybrid, or remote? Just maybe, or discussion points that you feel like aren't being made by any party in this whole debate in general, just stuff that's not being talked about.
You and I have had a lot of conversations about this, interacting online, and when we've had discussions. And I think at this point, most organizations that we deal with and the leaders that I speak to have thoroughly thought it through. The people that work for those organizations may not be happy with the conclusion they came with, but I think they've thought it through. And I think, at a most basic level, where I try to have some of these, most of my conversations, you have leaders that are trying to run their operation each day and take their organization to to where their goals are going to lead them. They're trying to take them into the future where they need to be. And they are all going to determine as teams what's the right approach for them, whether they need everybody on site every day, whether there's a hybrid, or whether there's fully remote is an option for them. And what you find with most organizations in our space is there's a combination. Some positions clearly have to be on site every day to do the job, and others can be more flexible with that. And I think that leaders are thinking those things through, and they're coming to conclusions. And I think most of them are also realizing that they've got to determine not only what they think works best for them, for themselves as leaders, but the people that they're leading, and also be thinking about the people they're trying to attract to the organization as well. And I think most of them will make adjustments if they're not getting the results they're looking for. And so I think there's a lot of opinions online that you're seeing about how it should be. And I just think that it's going to take it some time for itself to shake out a little bit. There's people that are working at organizations today that aren't happy with what the outcomes have been, and they'll move on, and new people will come in at least understanding what's expected, and things will settle in a bit, and they'll probably still shift a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I think the time frame to let things settle out is extremely valid point. I think that there will be a couple years potentially of reshuffling. Personally, I don't think we'll get back to pre-COVID levels of, I think single digits, maybe even low single digit percentage work from home. But I don't think we're going to ever get, I don't want to say ever. I don't think anytime soon we'll likely get back to the, I'll call it mid-pandemic numbers where it was like 35% work from home. I think someplace in between there is where it'll shake out. And for good or for ill, that I think that's where we're going to be. And what's interesting about that is there's so many at this point now. There's data I've seen that says remote is more productive, and I've seen data that says it's less productive. So again, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of the pros and cons, but again, for me personally, I think so much of it comes down to leadership. If it is those people are effectively led and effectively managed who can be remote, then that will yield dividends for those organizations. But just like so many other business processes, doesn't matter if it could be remote, if it's got poor leadership or poor management, because those are different things, that could just, ruin the whole endeavor for a given company. Is that something, does that sort of ring true with you, or is that something that it sounds like I'm out in left field here?
No, I agree with you. And I think as small as some of the tactics may be, leaders are recognizing that if that's the path they want to take, either because it's what they need to do to attract people or what they need to do to satisfy the people they have now, most of them are recognizing and implementing new tactics that work. I think a couple things off the top of my head is just being a little bit more intentional about outreach to your team. You're not able to as easily rely upon people crossing paths, meeting at the water cooler, as they say. I heard somebody on a podcast a while back talk about how they have their open office hours and they work on one laptop and have another one open for anybody to ping in at any time like that. So that's one idea. There's plenty of them out there, but I think people are recognizing that it's not, let me say it this way, working remotely and building the department, I think, has its own workflow in itself. And so just like implementing a new system, it's not let's take what's manual, automate what's manual and implement. Let's take a look at what's there and really break down what it needs to be. And I think working remote is the same thing. So I think positions are changing. I think that there's, it doesn't mean you take everybody and everybody goes remote. It could mean that one position or two could be 100% remote. Some still need to be hybrid. Right. But I think the workflows of how you communicate with your staff and you meet with your staff are all things that are reset. I was talking to a leader the other day who would say, I used to have a quarterly town hall and now they're doing it monthly. So just a little bit more communication because they're not quite coming in as often. Same thing, requiring mid-level management to have more intentional conversations. So I think those things are going to adjust. But in the same respect, there's some people that don't do these things well. And they're not going to get the results they want. And hopefully they'll adjust. I think that's the ultimate, barometer is, are you getting the results you're looking for? Right. And I think if they are, they'll keep doing what they're doing. And if they're not, they'll change.
Yeah. Well, and for individuals too, because not everybody wants to be remote. Not everybody wants to stay home and never have any human interaction. Lots of people want that, or they just don't want the commute or whatever. But there's also a lot of people who work might be where they get a lot of their socialization. I saw a study once that showed how many relationships, and by that I mean romantic relationships, appropriate or not, I'm just going to say, come from coworkers, right? Some people get married they meet somebody at work and they fall in love and they get married. Can't do that as well. Maybe you still could if you're remote, but to your point about that less frequent bumping into folks at the coffee machine or whatever, it's going to be a lot harder. The flip side of that, though, is perhaps unwanted advances or the harassment that comes in the workplace. And so I think there's likely to be a reduction in some of that if people are remote. So, I mean, it's just a fascinating time to be working and to be going through this stuff. And I think there's just a lot of evolution still to come in this space. And I appreciate your insights and the genuine feeling that leaders are thinking this through in depth and trying to do what's right for both their people and their organization. That's good.
It's going to remain fluid. I think you and I have talked about this. Well, I guess two factors here. Number one, I think you're absolutely
Mm-hmm.
right. Everybody many people have different opinions. I think the people that want to be remote, um, to them, it makes so much sense and works for them for whatever reason. Maybe the work they're doing is better when they're isolated for a period of time, and there's those conveniences of a quick in and out to pick up one of their kids from school at a certain
Mm-hmm.
time, and it makes all the sense to them. I know many others. I think we would advise, probably both from our conversations, advise younger professionals that this is a great time to go meet some people and develop some relationships.
100%.
I don't know. I've built relationships. You and I, now that I'm thinking about it, have been 100% remote. But for every relationship I've built remotely, on the phone via Zoom, I think it goes to another level when we finally do meet face to face. For whatever reason, that's just how I feel about it. So I think finding that combination that works for each individual is a little bit different. The thing is, the example I was going to give you is that we started a remote within our own business in a remote policy in about 2011, 12, 13. I can't remember exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally did it. A lease was coming up. We were going to move our office. I made it a little bit closer to where I lived, which I knew was going to make it more inconvenient for some folks. So I didn't think it was quite right to have somebody take a job thinking they were, 10 minutes away, and now they're 30 minutes away or 20 minutes away. So we put a remote policy in place. And what I thought was interesting is we had someone at the time who was probably, if I recall, 25, and the person was in a relationship and living with a best friend. And the remote worked great. And about 7 months later, the relationship had ended and the best friend had moved out. And that person came to me and said, "Do you mind if I come in the office a little bit more?" And explained why. So some of those things, like we were talking about, that made that individual comfortable because they were getting a lot of their social interaction away from their coworkers, was different 6, 7 months later, where they were actually looking for a little bit more interaction. We accommodated it. So I think that's one of the challenges too. Depends where you're at. If you're at a certain phase in life, that's going to probably be a certain way for a while. Probably not too much risk without wanting to change for you. But depending upon where you are, if there's some likelihood that could change, you may view things differently. And I wonder how organizations will react to that if they've adjusted and the office space goes away, and the rest of those things that we've become accustomed to.
That brings up an interesting thought in my mind, and that thought can head us towards some conversation I wanted to have about Great Resignation, Great Reshuffle, all that stuff. But we live in this era of many, many things in life being highly individualized and highly customized, right? We can get the things we want mail ordered off Amazon. We can pick the subscription plan we want from HBO Max. We can, whatever, right? We can get a pretty customized universe. You can get your, double soy, whatever latte, made just how you want it at your favorite coffee place. But the workplace largely seems to continue to be one size fits all, or at least mostly so. Here's our benefits plan. Here's our PTO package. Here's our vacation plan. And yet, there seem to be, despite signs of recession, perhaps actual recession, that there remain large talent shortages. So, do you think that we're going to head into an era of increased customization for employees, or do just the headaches of trying to manage that make it impossible?
Well, that's an excellent question. I would think you're going to run into many organizations that are of a certain size that it can make it impossible just from not showing, I don't even know the right, unjustifiable favoritism in any way. I would think that there might be some way you could put a menu option together with certain weights that if you had a little more of this, you could have a little less of that, and people could pick what's most important to them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think as a small business, I try to be very flexible with my employees. I think everybody's completely different. Their needs are different. And I used to say something to the effect of, I promise to treat everyone differently. And what I meant by that is not trying to put everybody into a box, but recognize what worked for them and made them happy being a part of our organization. So I would think that would be a great strategy for those that could adopt it, but I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that there's going to be that capacity to do something like that? There's so many large organizations that I think are pretty strict, pretty stringent upon how much flexibility they have in certain areas.
I certainly would like there to be more flexibility. I think that as we've been talking about, people are nuanced, people are unique, and their situations are different and dynamic. Not only are they different, but they change over time. And so I think if organizations had the ability to improve customization of what they offer to candidates, that would likely be a differentiator to many candidates in terms of choosing where to work. But I hadn't thought about your point about even unintentional discrimination. That's not something that any organization wants. I wouldn't want that, neither to do that to staff nor to have it done to me. And also, so I think that's a barrier. And the other barrier I think is, honestly, and maybe I'm just biased coming from the healthcare space, is the regulations around health insurance and the risk pooling and how to fund insurance. And these things put a number of handcuffs, I think, on organizations, because really to afford to get your premiums down and so forth, you have to put healthy folks in with your sick folks. And if the healthy folks can opt out of it because they don't want the benefits as much or whatever, they'd rather, let's say there was a waiting system like you mentioned, maybe they want a week off more than they want health care, right? More PTO. Now your cost for those people who do want it because they are middle-aged or older or have conditions or have kids, I think some of that decreases the viability. I think insurance and healthcare and funding that creates some shackles.
Absolutely.
Okay, so customization might help with talent. So let's talk talent. Great Resignation, Great Reshuffle, quiet quitting, all these things from the last couple years. Pick your buzzword, buzz phrase, whatever. But one of the things I've seen you post about, you and I have talked about, and I think is really critical for people to understand, if for no other reason than to make sure they're not just being hyped up about trends that perhaps aren't as worthy of hype, is the comparison using data, going back to data, of pre-pandemic retirements, pre-pandemic job quitting, pre-pandemic surveys of who wants to quit their job or who's engaged or not engaged or whatever, to now. Because now I feel like we're seeing all these articles about 75% of people want to quit their job. Right, but I remember studies from 2018 that said 80% of people were disengaged. Why would those be different then? If you're disengaged, doesn't that mean by definition you want to quit? So talk a little bit about if you think we're seeing returns to baseline, if you feel like we never really got that far away from baseline, but it was maybe some exceptions mid-COVID. What are you seeing and feeling out there in the data around all this great reshuffle?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot to take into consideration with that, David. I think to your point, we're definitely in the buzzword era, but the other thing, like you said, that I've noticed is 80% are dissatisfied, 75% want to quit. Is that just how the poll question was asked? But the same
enough.
thing, right? Or did they self-interpret what dissatisfied meant? So we don't know with those polls,
Right.
with pulse surveys that come out from time to time as well. So I think, it's interesting leading up to this, I had sent you a chart from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that was a bar chart, and it showed the amount of voluntary resignations over the years. And it trended pretty consistently in an upward direction, I think partially because of the growing work population. From 2011 to, what did the chart went to, 19. And then there was a big dip in resignations in 20, primarily due to the fact of significant layoffs that were taking place.
Right.
But when you came back to 21, if you were to connect the line from 19 to 20 and then 21, it doesn't look like it missed a beat. 21 jumped a little bit, but it wasn't too far off the trend.
Yeah.
And I think the shock that's happening in the marketplace is organizations were laying off people, so therefore, based upon where they were prior, they were understaffed. Now resignations began to come from the current staff as they're trying to hire back at a level that they hadn't in quite some time. Really created a lot of chaos for some organizations. And so I think that's where the Great Resignation came from. I don't know. I think people have more options today. I heard somebody say people aren't as loyal as they were in the past. And he said, I thought about it, I don't think the people were ever loyal. They just didn't have as many options. Now, that's not to say they weren't loyal. It's just it might have appeared that they were more loyal because there just weren't as many options. But
Right.
If there's so many different careers, so many different organizations, think of the organizations that exist today that didn't exist 50, 60 years ago. We start getting into remote situations. I remember once talking to somebody about just resumes in general and the conclusions that people come to on resumes. And this goes back, I was having this conversation 20 years ago. And they said, I want to interview candidate A, who's been at their organization for 6 years. Candidate B looks to be a job hopper. And the example I made just in general was, well, candidate A might have been at their organization for, 6 years, but they've been looking for a new job ever since they were there for 6 months. They just haven't found it. So, the appearance of they were there and loyal and it's working out, whatever, maybe they haven't been happy. So that's what struck me about the comment I heard. So I think about were people loyal, or are there more options? I don't know. There's certainly many people that feel a sense of belonging and loyalty and a part of the team. I wonder, like in the example I gave you, how many people are where they're at, giving the impression of longevity when they've been looking, and they have no reason to jump ship. They don't have to. They just haven't found the right thing. So I think today, without a doubt, there's with a percentage of organizations now willing to hire hybrid or fully remote, there are going to be people that have options today that they didn't have in the past.
Yeah.
And we'll see how the fact that there's more options affect things like the Great Resignation, if turnover rates or voluntary resignations come back because of pent up, the fact that people weren't leaving was pent up, or are we in a different, will turnover just be a little bit higher moving forward? We'll see.
I think that on the loyalty front, to me, there's three main factors in that. Demographics, culture, and incentives. Incentives is probably the easiest to tackle, right? Human beings follow incentives, and there's a quick Google will find you many papers and articles and opinions about changing jobs every X often will yield you more lifetime earnings. Because these days, for whatever reason, organizations, and when I say these days, I mean the last several decades, they give a small percentage increase every year to the people who stay there. But if you change jobs, you can probably finagle a 8, 9, 10, 15, 20% raise, right? So people are going to follow those incentives. The second is cultural. Companies, many of them, have not necessarily displayed loyalty to their employees, and people can see that. There's the news, there's the internet. You can hear about your cousin whose job is now in China or whatever. Again, over the last 40 years. This is not a recent phenomenon. And over that length of time, that changes culture. And not just, I don't mean like company culture, I mean societal culture. Mm-hmm. And if a company is choosing, sometimes out of necessity, sure, but sometimes perhaps not as necessary and more about shareholder value and things like that to maximize profit, whatever. And I'm not here to judge on that. I'm just saying it happens. And people see that and then they go, why should I stay? If they're not going to, if the company's not going to be loyal, why should I be loyal? And there's that one probably can get into all sorts of politics and economics and whatever, but we'll throw that one out there. And then the last is demographics. And I think it's fairly true, and you can tell me if you disagree with this, but that most people early in their careers move jobs more frequently than folks later in their careers. And speaking in generalizations. And we had a large demographic dip in the size of Generation X. It's half the size of the Boomer generation and roughly half the size of the Millennial generation, depending on who draws the boundaries on each of these generations. So Generation X is up there, 40s, 50s. Boomers are headed towards retirement, and the workers that have been entering the workplace for the last 10, 15 years are those millennials. So as they age into more of their middle career, it's likely that they'll move around less. But as they've been in their early career, just by nature of them being younger workers and outnumbering Generation X, they move around more. So that one to me is almost like a duh kind of moment, So I don't know. Do you think those three factors are, they may not be the be all end all. And of course, again, I'm speaking in generalizations, but do you feel that those three factors I've laid out are impactful on employee tenure?
Yeah, they definitely are. They, the demographic part's hard to know how much that's going to kind of come into play. I think when you defined culture, you said not, if I heard you correctly, not necessarily company culture, but our culture.
Right.
I wonder. I almost hesitate saying this because I don't know if I can say it as clearly as I want to as I'm thinking about it. But is there a type of business culture? What is that culture that's going to lead to more stability? What does that have to turn into? So the three factors you mentioned, and then put in there a type of organization that's going to be most appealing. Does that, you understand where I'm coming from?
I sure do. And I think that's a really fascinating question because the rapidity of change in the modern world, both business world, technology, just everything, the pace of change is very fast right now. So what kind of organization is going to be able to keep up with that change while being an organization that has encourages higher tenure and longevity? Because to some degree, higher tenure and longevity work as a counterbalance to rapidity of change, right? So it may be more about retention within a company, but not within a role within a company, perhaps. So maybe a company that could do that develops and moves people around the company into different new exciting roles and to bring new perspectives internally, but they don't just stay as staff accountant for 5 years and then move to senior accountant for 5 years. And that's a really interesting thought experiment about what that type of company that's going to thrive for the next decade is going to look like.
Yeah. I think that there's, in line with something we were talking about a little bit earlier, organizations using data, are there challenges that they have or potential mistakes that they may make. I think something an organization has to do, if we talk about recruiting or tenure, starts with the recruiting, leads to the tenure, is recognizing what that organization has to offer and attracting people who will find what they have to offer appealing. And there's many different areas. Are they looking for challenge? Are they looking for advancement? Are they looking for dollars? Are benefits important to them? All those things making up the culture. And so, some people you're hiring, if your organization doesn't have a lot of rungs to the ladder, and you don't plan to grow to create those rungs, then you should hire people who aren't looking for those things or understand you'll have turnover.
Right.
And so, that's just the easiest example. So now people change too. People get into a career and they think that they want to be the accountant in the mid-level and a senior level accountant. And pretty soon they realize, I don't want to do that anymore. That's something for an organization to determine and predict, and you're going to lose some people. But I think sometimes there's a misalignment in organizations recognizing who they are, what they have to offer, where they're, if you were to take the different things that organizations can offer and rank yourself compared to the market, and that market being the people you're trying to attract, where do you rank there? Are you at the top of any of them? Are you maybe not at the top of any of them, but you're in the upper quartile of all of them? Those are things to consider when you're bringing people aboard who you're trying to attract.
Yeah.
If you, there's only one best paid company, one company that pays the best. There's 20% that are in the top 20%. I don't know if you want to be in the bottom 20%, but I think that there's some that are in the upper half that have a lot of other things to offer. And there's going to be people that are at a time where they're looking for dollars. And there's people that get to a dollar amount that they're content with. And it's not about an increase. It could be about, like we said, the challenge, the new projects, the people they're working with, the location of where they work, the remote aspect. So I think those things will have a big influence how well an organization can do that. I don't know how we put that into a industry-wide turnover, because
Sure.
I think that'll get washed out. But from an organization to organization, I think that those are some proactive things organizations can do to create that culture and have the turnover be lower than their competitors.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that one of the keys to that probably would be looking at yourself and what you're bringing to the market being talent, is you better brush the ego away and be very realistic with yourself about how you rank. You can't, you can't fool yourself on that one. And I think some organizations do, and some organizations are probably very frank with themselves. So just be knowledgeable about that.
Absolutely.
So one of the things then, I think, as we've been talking, an implication perhaps is some of what we're talking about is advice for candidates, but a lot of it is thoughts on, I would say, probably middle and larger size organizations. You're a small business owner. Any advice for smaller businesses out there, how to deal with the talent landscape today that perhaps is different than some of the other things we've been talking about?
Well, that's a big question. I
Sorry
think
to spring that one on you. I know we kind of did a little bit of prep, but that one was, as we've been talking, I'm like, how does this scale to a smaller business?
Yeah, I think we think about that a lot. I think if there's some of the same principles. Who are we trying to attract? What are the attributes we're looking for in somebody that we're willing and we are going to develop? And so gosh, I don't know. I kind of feel like I know what our time limit is, and we'll run way over the time limit. So going back just to the small business, I think there are a lot of the same principles. I think sometimes what we deal with is not necessarily having, first off, we're probably in our very local community have some name recognition, but outside of that, maybe not to the people we're looking to hire. I think
Right.
in our industry we might, but the people we're looking to hire locally, not as much. But quite frankly, not other than the big household name consumer products or people organizations that sell the consumer. There's most companies don't have that kind of name recognition either. I think it's a lot of the same principles, but I also think that sometimes when you're smaller, you can bring people in and compete from a compensation level in certain positions, but you've really got to be dedicating, especially in your smaller organization, bring people in and teach them your way, the HealthcareIS way, and be willing to invest that time so they learn how we do things. I think if we add one person to a team of 20 or 5 people to a team of 20 next year, it's going to have a much bigger impact than 5 people to a group of 120.
Right.
So now, and again, one in each department and what have you might have its own effect in the bigger company. But that's something that I've noticed over time is that to the degree that we can bring people in, offer them a type of opportunity that they haven't had before, the training and the career development that they haven't had exposure to, and then make sure we're growing as an organization so that there's additional positions for the people that have been here a while and are trying to grow that we want to retain. Those are the main focus points when we're looking internally right now, or when we're hiring internally.
Well, and let's stick on the small business front, but then get more narrow to not necessarily your company, but your profession. So if somebody's maybe younger listener, maybe mid-career, they want to change jobs, they want to know what's out there, or just get into your business as a career. What do you have to do? You mentioned earlier the barrier to entry is not particularly high. What do you have to do to get into the recruitment industry? And obviously it can lead to entrepreneurship and owning a business, because you've been doing that successfully for over 2 decades. What does that pathway for somebody look like to get into your industry and be successful at it?
Well, I think there's many staffing firms. So I think staffing, recruiting, certain levels. I think something to think about is there's different types, as we talked about earlier, whether that's for full-time roles or projects or volume or specialty consulting contractors. So that's something that it's hard to give. Each one of those areas can be a lot of information in each. So that's an area you've got to figure out. The second thing is industries. What industry do you want to be a part of and work? So those are things to think about. There's many organizations, and I would say talk to as many people as you can to learn within those different areas, which sounds like it's the right place for you. But on top of that, I would say to be successful, you really have to have a long-term mindset. And I think I was fortunate enough to talk to people when I was considering this profession, sorry about that they said, you got to be in it for the long run. Do your research and be in it for the long run, because you're building relationships with people. And it's almost like take whatever your goals are in year 1 and be willing to accomplish them in year 2. And whatever you want to do in year 2, accomplish in year 3. So you're not trying to force people to do things that aren't the right decision. And if you can let things happen organically or how they should, you speak to somebody great, but the timing isn't right.
Yeah.
You don't want to be pushing them in the wrong direction. And I think most people appreciate that when they can recognize it and appreciate when they're dealing with someone who has that mindset.
Yeah.
And again, that could be a challenge, because depending on the organization, depending on the culture, that may not be the mindset of leadership. It could be about hitting numbers immediately. So, like any business, we have goals that we need to hit, but we also try to take into consideration that having something come together to hit a quarterly number isn't always in the long-term best interest of if it's not in the best interest of the candidate or the client we have, it's certainly not going to be in our best interest in the long run.
Right.
So I think if they have the ability to look at it in the long run and join an organization that sees things that way, they have a much higher likelihood of being successful in the long run than having to push things too early on.
Yeah. No, that's great. And the long-term mindset, I think, is something that I certainly know I struggle with it, but I think societally we're we're a society that, in comparison to some other societies, is not great at long-term thinking. And I've read that the I don't know if it was the Chinese or the Japanese culture. I mean, they think in generational terms, and things like that. And so I think that's a cool piece of advice for getting into your business. So last question,
All right.
a bit of a curveball question. If you had to leave a listener who's a candidate, who's a job seeker out there with one piece of advice at the end of this podcast, what is the one tactic, the one strategy, the one piece of advice that you would hope that they would do as they're searching for work in the current environment?
Yeah, well, the one piece of advice, I may not answer it exactly how you just qualified it at the end, but the one piece of advice I would really tell people, depending upon where they are, I think the people who have advanced in their careers have looked at it this way. I think that there are people who've benefited from head down, working hard, adding accomplishments to their resume per se, to their career, and an opportunity pops up and they happen to have the right background and they're in the right place at the right time. But I think that there could be things I think people could be a little more strategic and tactical about things. And so what I mean by that is really sitting down and thinking about where you want to be. I hate to say things like 20 years from now because things can change so much, but really think about the role you want 5 years from now, and think about what you need to accomplish. So when that time comes and you begin to pursue that role, you have accomplished what most organizations are going to be looking for. And sometimes that means you've got to look at another place to go to because you're not going to accomplish those things where you are. Or it might be a conversation you can have with the person you report to today to see if those possibilities are going to happen for you. But I think what happens is many times people get to a point and they look at what they're doing and they think they should have more and they think they should be able to go to the next step in a career, and they really just haven't accomplished everything they need to accomplish to be competitive. Now, having said that, the market's changing quite a bit, so it's very hard to predict what the roles of the future are going to be and how we're going to define what a qualified person for that role or somebody who can be successful in the role. I think the lines are a little more blurry. I think there's more positions than ever that can take somebody from many different backgrounds and be successful. So, but using what I said at the beginning as a guiding point, really think of today where you want to be down the road and what you need to accomplish to be able to take that next step.
Yeah, bring in some planning and intentionality to it.
Yep, you said it right there. I could have summed it up in those two words. Thanks.
Well, I think that's very good advice, and I think on that good advice, we'll wrap up here. Dave, thank you for being here with me on No Bad Questions. If people want to find you, find your firm, your organization, what's the best on the socials, whatever? What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn, and also, company website is HealthcareIS.com. And we've got a company page there as well. Those are probably the quickest and the easiest. On Twitter, not as frequently, at David Kushan. So love to hear from people and help out any way we can.
All right. Dave Kushan, No Bad Questions, some great advice on looking for the next step in your career for organizations to try to handle the talent market we have today, and some wonderful thoughts about thinking of your career in long-term time frames. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time on No Bad Questions.